Richard Cottingham, also known as the Torso Killer and the Times Square Killer, is in his mid-70s now and is finally confessing to a few more of his many crimes. Recently, he confessed to the 1970 strangulation of 26-year-old Lorraine McGraw. Three people have been key in drawing confessions out of Cottingham: former detective Anzilotti, daughter of one of his victims, Jennifer Weiss, and serial killer expert Peter Vronsky. In this episode, we examine his relationship with each of them. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the True Crime Squad. This is Katie Weaver. I am here with my co host that you guys have never met before but heard a lot about, my husband, Scott Weaver. Hello.
Hello.
Scott is pinch hitting. Christy is out this week. As you know, she's had surgery, and we want to thank you all for all of the kindness that you have sent her way and let you know that she's doing great. All was well. The surgery went well. She's home resting and really feeling good. We went to see her a couple of days ago, and she looked awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So
Okay.
it's all good. But Scott, thank you for filling in.
Okay, I'll do my best.
I mean, Scott hears a lot
No
about true
promises.
crime. I would say just be you, but maybe don't. I don't know. Just kidding. You'll be fine.
That's not true. You've already told me what I couldn't say.
That's
I
true.
got a pep talk before. This is what you can say. This is what you can't say. No rants. You know.
I just said no 20-minute long rants. That's all I said.
Okay.
Scott and I have done plenty of radio together, but we've not done live streams together or video. So this is new for him. And I will admit the puppies are on the loose because usually they're locked out of my office, but there's no way to do that right now. So you may hear a little puppy noise today, and I apologize. The puppies are also convalescing. They got neutered last weekend. So, well, 2 days ago, I guess. And wow. Yeah, they're a lot of work. Get 2 puppies, they said.
They're a lot of work as it is, and then you add that to it, then it's just that much more.
They're doing fine. I mean, the morning after surgery, you guys, when we picked them up from the vet, they actually had the nerve to say to us, no running or jumping for 14 days. We laughed and laughed. And, like, I get the sentiment, I do, but have you ever met a puppy?
Well, I mean, what were we supposed to do? Tie them up, lock them in their crate? I mean,
crate them would be the only thing you could do. And even then, if they were together, they'd wrestle the hell out of each other.
Well, and they'd still jump to try and get out and stuff like that. So
yesterday morning, yesterday morning I had them out back going potty. One of our other dogs, Blue, was running and playing with them. It was super wild, and I'm out there yelling at them. The vet said 14 days. They didn't care. They did not care. But I think that just tells you how well they're healing. They act like they're completely fine.
They didn't listen, little bastards.
What do you do? Yeah, they rarely do. But they're cute, so we let it slide.
We let a lot of stuff slide because they're cute.
We really do. It's pretty terrible. Our kids have accused us of having spoiled dogs because we don't discipline them. What does that make our kids? They know not what they say, really.
Beyond spoiled, I think.
Yes. Well, guys, this is our Monday episode, and we're going to kick it off with a little WTF news. When you hear of a jewel heist, you might be thinking about some kind of an old-timey, robbed the train or robbed some fancy museum in London or something like that, maybe, or maybe something else. I don't know. What does a jewel heist trigger for you?
I don't have anything specific, but just dollar signs,
Yeah, that too, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, there was a big jewel heist on July 11th in Los Angeles.
Hmm.
Here's what happened. There were two drivers of a Brinks truck. Brinks is, of course, one of the armored car services that transport money and jewels and other, high-end things, right?
Right.
Well, the Brinks truck stopped along their way, and they had 22 bags of jewels in their truck at the time.
Wow.
22 bags. Yeah. So they stopped to because one of them needed to go into the Flying J and get food. So there's a lot about this story that I think is pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
So driver 1 left driver 2 asleep in the truck and went into the Flying J for food. It is 2:32 a.m. 27 minutes later, he comes back. Wait a minute. Who the hell is in line at the Flying J for 27 minutes at 2 o'clock in the morning?
Well,
How?
the guy who's making sure that his friends have enough time to steal those 22 bags of jewels.
Right? Like,
Did he
what
leave the
hell?
back door unlocked for him too?
No. But when he returned, he said that the red plastic seal around the trailer was cut and lying on the ground. So he inspected the trailer's rear lock and found that it had been cut away. Mm-hmm. Part of the problem is that, so Brinks is getting sued, obviously. And one of the things they're saying is that the people who shipped the bags substantially underdeclared the value on the manifest. So Brinks says that the value on the manifest says that what was in the truck was worth $8.7 million.
Okay.
But the people whose jewels they were packing says that the missing shipment exceeds $100 million worth of jewels. So there's a big discrepancy right now between that, what the manifest said versus what the people who, essentially got robbed are saying. And also, they're a little pissed at Brinks that this happened. And in the middle of it is the insurance saying, well, we're not going to pay more than what's on the manifest.
Right. Well, that almost sounds like maybe the jewelers were involved in it, Now they're claiming $100 million when it was, $8 million to begin with. I mean,
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So
are these all blood diamonds too? Illegally shipped in?
Right. Where did they come from? Well, part of the report in People says that some of the jewels came from mom and pop style jewelry bakers, that were shipping out their goods, and that this is like their entire livelihood just gone.
They were now okay. One more time, explain that one to me again.
Jewelers.
They were jewelers, like mom and pop jewelers that were shipping to a big company, or that they had ordered, and this was their order coming in after they had already paid for it.
No, I believe they were jewelry makers who were shipping out things that had been made. Not all of it. I mean, there was a lot here, but anyway, so this is literally completely flattened some like small family-owned type businesses and been a huge hardship for others, of course. But I thought it was interesting. But my first question is how did that truck get left unattended like that? I mean, yes, there was someone in it, but they were asleep for 27 minutes when they stopped at a gas station to grab food. That doesn't track for me.
How are you a Brinks security guard and you're sleeping in your while you're on
truck
duty?
At all? Yeah, I mean, good question.
How do you go to work knowing that you're going to work guarding 22 bags of jewelry and you're going to fall asleep and just pretend while your cohort goes inside? Or were you pretending to be asleep? Were you part of the
And the articles that I read didn't indicate that there was any suspicion at all on the Brinks drivers.
Hmm.
But I do think it's odd. There's a lot about this story that's pretty odd. From the
Yeah.
underreporting on the manifest, which, definitely raises some red flags about why that is, to how this all went down.
Right.
And
Well, I mean, how they're hiding, you know, $82 million, $92 million worth of jewelry.
right? I know.
I
It
mean,
doesn't track. We'll keep an eye on this one because I think it's pretty interesting, all of it.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks to me like if jewelry robbers in California are pretty common, considering that there was also a smash and grab at a Target jewelry store in LA a couple of days ago too. Maybe LA should get their shit together and
Crack down.
keep an eye on who's stealing jewelry.
That seems like a good plan. Well, with that, I think we'll go ahead and roll over into our main case.
Okay, what do you got for me?
I've got big breaking news. So we're talking about the torso killer, not to be confused with the torso murders that happened in Cleveland in the 30s. This is the torso killer who operated in New York City and New Jersey in the late 70s and into 1980. His name, of course, is Richard Cottingham. So, Richard Cottingham has been a well known serial killer for a long time. But just recently, he's been in the press several times because some of his murders are getting solved, partly at his behest and partly due to DNA. But it's really interesting because there are three different people who've worked really hard to build relationships with Richard in order to get him to start spilling some of his secrets. So I want to tell you a little bit about him first. However, any true crimers, you probably already know his name. There have been books written about him. I mean, there's certainly press out there about him. So this will be the Cliff's Notes because this could be several episodes. So, if I leave a few details out, that's probably why. However, this would definitely be a serial killer that you might want to study if you're well into studying serial killers, if you haven't already.
He was also a rapist too, as I understand,
Oh,
right? I
oh
mean, so it
yeah,
wasn't just serial killing; he was actually raping his victims too.
most of them. Yeah,
Yes. Okay.
yeah. So we know that he murdered a minimum of 12 women, but he says that he believes that he's committed somewhere between 80 to 100, in his word, perfect crimes.
Mm.
But they haven't solved anywhere near that number. So that's kind of that's the first thing that you really have to know about him. So let's talk about him as a killer first of all. So he lived in Brooklyn. He was born in New York City, lived in Brooklyn, was married, had 3 kids, and then was separated. And he was living in New York City and he was working. Uh, Something really interesting about him, actually. He was working for Blue Cross Blue Shield as a computer person. Interestingly, also working at the same place is John Berger, who is also a well known serial killer, the dating game killer.
Mm.
Though there's no evidence that those two actually knew each other, but they were both living, working, and operating in basically the same sphere at the same time, which is pretty fascinating, I think. But he had kind of he'd kind of been getting in trouble for a while. And in 1969, he was charged and convicted of drunk driving. In 1972, he was charged and convicted of shoplifting. In 1973, he was arrested for robbery and sex abuse of a sex worker and her pimp. But when it came time to testify against him, neither of them showed up to court and the case was dismissed. In 1974, he was also arrested for robbery and unlawful imprisonment on a sex worker. Again, the complainant didn't show up to court and the case was dismissed, which honestly is so damn sad because a lot of these murders could have been prevented. But it's been a well known thing to Johns that they can abuse women who are working in sex work and get away with it because they're so much less likely to go to the police due to their own, challenges with law enforcement. And he was really capitalizing on that. So those are things that we know about him in the 60s and 70s about some of the crimes that he was committing. I mean, all the while he got married in 1970, so kind of all the while he was working, had his wife and children. Now his wife filed for divorce in 1978, but she actually withdrew the petition on his arrest in 1980. And then once he was convicted of his first murder, she went ahead and went through with the divorce. So she was kind of on the
Well,
outskirts of this.
and he was. She filed on the grounds of abandonment.
Mhm.
Basically, that after having 3 kids, he didn't want to come home. He would stay out
Mhm.
till all hours of the night and
Mhm.
mornings, and then would not wasn't helping to provide funds to
Mhm.
keep them and her and the kids
Yeah.
um, in money to
Mhm.
live.
And what we know now is that at that point he had already gotten an apartment and was using that as a place that he was taking prostitutes back to and some things like that. We also know that after he was arrested, it was discovered that there was a room in the basement of their home that was locked and she wasn't allowed into. And my God, how many times have we heard this story? That there was a room or a garage or a something that the wife was not allowed to go into every damn time. And what's in it? All their murdery stuff. I mean, as with him, he actually had some souvenirs from some of his victims. So he had been on a murder spree for a while. And of course, this is between New Jersey and New York, and he didn't have a really clear pattern. One girl, Jacqueline Harp, that he killed was 13 years old. She was walking home from band practice, and he strangled her with the leather strap of her bag. In 1968, in 1969, Irene Blaze was found in 4 feet of water in Saddle River, also strangled with a cord or a wire. And then also in 1969, in July, Denise Falaska, who was 15, she was walking to a friend's house and disappeared and was found by the side of the road next to a cemetery, also strangled. And that's kind of where it began.
Well, his first victim was in '67 when
Yeah.
he murdered when he was 21 years old, and he murdered a 29-year-old mother of 2
Hmm.
on her way to bingo,
Yeah.
and had her tied
Yeah.
up and bound, and they found her under a blanket in the passenger seat or driver's seat or something like that of her car.
Yeah. Nancy Vogel. Yeah. Yeah. So, but that one they didn't have, he didn't actually get prosecuted for that one until 2010.
Right. Yeah, it was
But
a long time before he admitted to that one.
so what he'd been doing essentially was, and that's why he was kind of hard to track because a lot of his murders were on sex workers, but not all of them. And the reason he got the reputation as the torso killer is that some of his victims, he would cut off their hands and their heads to try to hide their identities, but not all of them. one of them, they lifted one print off of her handcuffs because a lot of them that were cuffed, they lifted one print, and that is the only print they ever got, ever got from him from all of these crimes. He was really careful and forensically aware. But at any rate, he finally got caught. And here's how he got caught. On May 15th, 1980, and there's been a whole bunch of murders up to this point, he picked up a girl. Oh, this was on May 22nd, sorry, 1980. He picked up an 18-year-old girl named Leslie Odell, and she was soliciting, and she made a deal with him that she'd have sex with him for $100. So they went to this hotel called the Hosbrook Heights Quality Inn, where 18 days later, he had murdered Valerie Street and left her body there. So the hotel was already on high alert that, there was a killer in the area, and they already had this horrific thing happen there. So he handcuffed her and started torturing her. And she testified later that he said, "You have to take it. The other girls did. You have to take it too. You're a whore and you deserve to be punished." Well, she managed to scream loud enough that the motel staff heard her. And they started pounding on the door and they called the police. And the police made it there and saved her life because of the hotel staff and arrested him. And when they arrested him, he had handcuffs, a leather gag, two slave collars, a switchback knife, replica pistols, and a stockpile of prescription pills. So they charged him with kidnapping, attempted murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, aggravated sexual assault, several assault charges of sexual assault, as well as possession of a weapon, possession of controlled substances. And that's where they finally got him off the streets. So they started putting two and two together, and they initially charged him and convicted him of 5 murders, 2 in New Jersey and a single one in New York. So this finally, by 1984, he's been sentenced for these 5 murders. He's been sentenced to several years in prison. For the next 30 years, he insists that he's innocent and insists that he's been framed. Apparently because he really wanted his family to believe that was true. Remember, he had 3 kids. So for 30 years, he's still claiming that he didn't do any of these things, even though he was caught red-handed. Like, they know he did these things, but he's continuing to claim that he's innocent. Well, the police know damn well it's not true. And right around 2000, a detective comes onto the scene that he starts really working hard to build a relationship with him. However, you can build a relationship with, a serial killer. So we're talking about Anzilotti or Anzilotti, sorry. Anzilotti. I'm going to say it right one of these times. Robert Anzilotti. So Robert Anzilotti starts working with him, just trying to get him to get real about, some of his other crimes, because there's all of these cold cases in the area from that time frame, and they really think that he committed some of them. But again, forensically, they just don't have very much proof. Well, he just starts talking to him pretty frequently, meeting with him, and he's a real bargainer. So it's always, what do I get? Well, one of the things that he loves is pizza from a place that is well known in New York. And so he brings pizza. He sits and chats with him for hours about anything and everything, and starts building kind of a rapport with him, and starts getting him to talk a little bit more about his crimes. Now, this isn't new. I mean, detectives do this all the time. It makes me think about Bundy and how they'd get him in a whole room of men that would start, listening to his stories and kind of egging him on. And pretty soon he's confessing to all kinds of shit and acting like he's like the talk of the town, like he's super cool. So Richard isn't quite like that because he's been a lot more private, but with certain people, he starts kind of becoming that guy, that's willing to start rolling out some of the information. So the more he starts talking to this detective, the more he starts telling the truth. And it takes him forever to get him to start confessing to anything. But one of the cases that he really suspected, and this was clear back in 1974. In 1974, two teenage girls were found in the woods in New Jersey, placed side by side. They had been raped and murdered. They were 17 and 16. And their parents said they were headed to the mall to buy swimsuits. And it was horrible. It was a horrible time. It was terrifying. And the police had nothing. There were no drugs. They had no legal troubles. Their boyfriends, ex-boyfriends, family members, everyone was cleared. The police were absolutely combing that area trying to figure out what happened to these girls. And of course, that was 1974. Well, by 2014, the local police are still trying to figure out what in the world happened to these girls. Well, Robert Anzilotti really thought that this was him and that this was Richard. And so he'd brought it up with him a few times and he'd kind of thrown him a few crumbs, like, hadn't admitted that he did it, but also gave him a few details about it that he could have only had if he did it. So he knew that there was something there, but he wasn't, you can't push him too hard or he'll back off of something. And so he'd been letting this conversation go, kind of in bits and pieces for years, just kind of waiting to see. Well, last year, after 25 years on the job, it's time for Ancelotti to retire. But he doesn't want to retire until he closes this case. So, yet again, he sits down with Cottingham and tells him, I'm out of here soon. But before I do, I want to know what happened. And then, by God, he spilled his guts. He picked those two girls up on his way to work and he saw them walking down the street. He pulled up, he asked them where they were headed. They said the mall. He said, hop in. He took them to the mall. But when they got there, there was a horrible downpour happening. And so they sat in the car and visited for quite a while. One interesting thing about these girls is that he knew their names. And most of his victims, he doesn't know their names. He could give you some descriptions of them, but didn't really know what their names were. But these girls, he did. The reason why? He sat in his car and visited with them for a couple of hours. And then he went and got a hotel room and forced them in there and ended up raping them both and putting them both in the bathtub and drowning them. And then, of course, drove out to the woods and placed their bodies. And he told the officers that he realizes now that those girls probably weren't going to tell anybody and he didn't really need to kill them. But at the time, he just felt like that was the right thing to do. So this was a huge case to close. Huge. This case has also been known as the Girls in the Woods. The victims are Mary Ann Pryor and Lorraine Kelly. So at any rate, that happened. And, he, as we know, actually went ahead and confessed to that one. And I believe that he's actually still waiting for sentencing on that crime.
I read he also confessed to 3 murders in New Jersey to some schoolgirls between 68 and 69. And
Mhm.
in return, he got immunity from prosecution
Mhm. Those
for admitting to
3,
those 3.
yep. Yep, those 3, and they didn't, announce those for quite a while to the press. They were supposed to be like a secret kind of a thing, but he told. So the families knew, but the families were told that they needed to keep it a secret because they were trying to convince him to give them more and confess to more of these murders and put some more of these cold cases to bed. And they were afraid that if that got out into the press, that he would stop talking.
Mm.
So, and that actually, Scott, dovetails nicely into our next confidant that he developed. So, of course, we have the detective. Well, and this is the wildest story, but I have to give this story the justice it deserves because it's so crazy how this happened. But in 1979, a young man named Peter Vronsky was stranded in New York for a few days. He was a filmmaker at the time, and he was low on cash, so he got a real sleazy hotel. And when he got to that hotel and got on the elevator, there was a man on the hotel on the elevator he described as a sandy-haired, pale man holding a bulky duffel bag. And when he got off the elevator and left this man behind and walked out into the hotel was full of ash, and he said it smelled like burning chicken feathers. He learned later that one of the rooms had 2 flaming torsos on twin beds, that someone had murdered 2 women, cut off their heads and hands, and started them on fire with lighter fluid. So what do you suppose was in that duffel bag?
Hmm.
So that was Peter Vronsky's first interaction with Richard. Well, he went on to become a historian and an author and an expert of serial killers. And of course, later learned, or at least figured that that's who was on the elevator with him. And if he's been fascinated with him over the years. And so he finally started having conversations with him and was able to actually finally get an interview. He had only given one interview in all of the time that he's been in prison since 1980, up until the time that Peter Vronsky finally got him to start talking to him. And this was only in, like, I think 2010. So Peter too is showing up, talking to him, having interviews with him, talking to him on the phone, and, you know, doing a lot of the same kinds of things the detective was in a little different sense, but reminiscing, chatting with him, and getting bits and pieces of his story out of him, and starting to also do his own detective work and put some 2 and 2s together. He wrote a letter to Rolling Stone, Cottingham did, saying, "For a long time now, I have been trying to understand the darkness that enveloped my soul during my youth. Remorse back then wasn't a part of my thought process. When the sun went down and the moon came up, the animal form that is in all of us came out and controlled my actions." And as we know, he was big on raping and torturing his victims before he murdered them. So, at any rate, this is one of the other people that he was able to talk to. And Vronsky has been like, between him and the detective, they've worked kind of together and then also kind of in some animosity to keep getting more confessions out of him. Well, about a year ago, something really remarkable happened. And that is that a crime was solved. that is the oldest case to be prosecuted on DNA evidence, we believe, in history at this point. It's another Vronsky murder. Or, sorry, not Vronsky, it's another Cottingham murder. And he was charged with this one in June. Just in June. Her name is Dianne.
Oh, go ahead.
Her name is Dianne Cusick. And on February 15th, 1968, she was a children's dance instructor. And she was going to the mall to buy shoes. And hours later, her parents found her dead in the backseat of her car. And she'd been beaten, raped, and strangled. And her case has been cold for 54 years. And just recently, her DNA yet again got ran through CODIS, and guess who it matched? Now, here's what's so wild about this one. He has never admitted this one. He pled not guilty. This is not one he's taking responsibility for, because nobody mollycoddled a confession out of him. This one is strictly on DNA. One thing from this case we learned from detectives is that one of his MOs was that he'd go into malls wearing things that looked quite official, and he'd grab young women and accuse them of shoplifting and convince them to come with him so that he could help them with this problem because he was posing as mall security. And that's how he was talking some young women out of malls into his car, or their car, as it was with this young lady.
Or
but I think it's amazing.
Using the handcuffs at that point to handcuff them and take them to the police station,
Yeah, something.
Yeah.
So that all happened just in June. Well, Thursday.
He's not in very good health, right? Because when they arraigned him for that murder of Dianne, he was in a hospital bed.
Yeah. He is in really failing health. That's part of the reason that all of this stuff is really they're racing the clock. Because, he's in his mid-70s. He's not in good shape. And, in fact, has been transferred not too long ago to basically a nursing home for serial killers because he's in such poor shape. So I want to introduce you to the other person that has managed to get into his inner circle of sorts. And this one is beyond wild. So, talking about Jennifer Weiss. So, Jennifer Weiss is a woman who was adopted when she was a baby. And when she was 23, she decided that she wanted to find her mother. So she contacted the adoption agency, and the adoption agency did some looking into her file, called her and said, "You need to come in here. We need to talk to you." So she came in and sat down with them, and they produced from her file a whole bunch of newspaper clippings that somebody, 23 years prior had clipped and put into her file of a murder. And the murder was of someone named Didi Goodzari. And it's an interesting thing. So here's the deal. When Didi put her up for adoption, she actually used a different name. But apparently she had a few aliases. She was a sex worker. And the lady at the adoption agency recognized her in the news as somebody who'd been murdered and had clipped all of these articles and saved them and put them in that file because she figured that was the mother of this daughter. So that's what she learned about her mother. Yeah. And so a lot of shocking stuff. Well, for a long time, she didn't, this was in 2003. And for a good 10 years, she didn't do anything. She didn't want to meet him. She didn't want to speak to him. She didn't want anything to do with him, of course. But then she went through cancer, and both of her adoptive parents have passed, and she decided that it's time for her to slay this dragon. So Jennifer Weiss starts building a bit of a relationship with Cottingham and visiting. It started with letters and emails, and then talking on the phone, and then actually going to the prison and visiting him, and working side by side with Zelinsky. Or I'm going to get that name wrong every time. At any rate, so they start working together and sitting down and talking with him and Vronsky, sorry, not Zelinsky, and again start piecing together more and more of his crimes. So now he has these three. Now it's interesting because he'll triangulate and play them against each other. But there's been some real challenges between the detective and the rest of the police department and Jennifer and Peter, because they all kind of are taking credit for getting some confessions out of this guy. And like, it doesn't matter. And they all kind of go, it doesn't matter, but because he's playing them all in some way, shape, or form. Right. But he particularly really loves Jennifer and has said so.
Well, she's very playful with him too. You see the videos and the pictures of
Uh-huh.
those two together, and they're very playful, and her pretending to strangle him. And I mean,
Uh-huh.
there's a lot of videos and pictures of the two of them out there together,
Mhm.
where she's treating him more like maybe a father figure or a human than what he's ever had.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. Uh he says here's some things he said about her in a letter, or in some. So he has JPay, which is the way people communicate usually out of prison. You have to pay for it. And he wrote her in 2017 apologizing for what he did to her mother, and he said, "I can't get you out of my head, girl." And then he told Rolling Stone, "Jen is generous, wild, brave, beautiful, and very vulnerable, like a bird with an injured wing. She follows her heart, and her instinct is very determined and sometimes drives me out of my mind. It's a love-hate relationship." Now, she says he's an old man in a wheelchair with dentures who killed up to 100 women. She says, stressing that they are not friends. "I'm not going to pretend I'm scared of him." In another article, she called him he looks like a Santa Claus who's gone to seed. But anyway, so between all these three, kind of building these relationships with him, we're starting to get these confessions to roll out. Well, the reason we're talking about this today is because last Thursday, a new revelation came out about one of his victims. He has confessed to another murder. And the granddaughter of that victim is really speaking out. So she took a page out of Jennifer's book and has worked with Jennifer to try to get something from him. So this woman's name is Lorraine McGraw. And her grandmother, she believes, was a victim of Richard Cottingham. And so she had started emailing him through the system, through JPay, and talking to him on the phone, and working with Jennifer as well to talk to him about Lorraine McGraw. She was strangled in 1970. She was 26. And he has now confessed to that. Now, there was supposed to be a presser last Thursday. There was a press conference set up, and Jennifer was present. He will only confess and talk about stuff like this if he has the right people there. So typically he wants Jennifer there, he wants Peter there, and of course he wanted the detective there, but he's retired, but he's still talking to him. So in this case, he was insisting that Jennifer be present. And of course, Lorraine McGraw, and they would have this conversation. Or I'm sorry, Lorraine was the victim. Sorry, that's wrong. Sonia is the granddaughter. Lorraine was the victim. So Sonia and Jennifer, they meet in this conference room, and they're supposed to be having this press conference with him via video that he was supposed to call into so that they could get an official confession from him, but he did not show. And they're saying that there's some challenges with JPay and with him calling in by video, and partly it's his health. They said it's probably was his health, but so big disappointment there. But apparently, the police department had already posted on Facebook about this confession and then took it down because it wasn't supposed to go live yet. Again, there's this very delicate dance they're all doing with Richard to continue to get more out of him before he passes because he's old and in shitty health. He's saying he killed somewhere between 80 and 100 women. And even up to now, we don't even have 15 out of his mouth.
Right.
So they're working really hard to get him to keep talking. Confessing to those New Jersey murders of those 2 girls that he killed and put in the woods, that was considered by him to be a gift. That was a retirement gift to the detective. He has started giving confessions as rewards and as gifts to the people that are working with him or speaking with him. So there's lots more to come, but I thought this was a fascinating case on all of those fronts. Also because this is a serial killer we have not heard as much about because he's been really quiet. And up until, not too long ago, up until about 2010, was still claiming he was framed and innocent all the while. So,
There's not
little
much out there about his family, though.
no,
Currently, is
Mm-mm.
like, does his kids have,
I don't
any
think so. I don't think so.
correspondence to him? I mean, yeah, I was unable to find anything stating that
hmm
his family still has anything or has anything to say, or they just written him off.
His kids weren't very old. He got married in 1970. He was arrested in 1980, so they couldn't have been more than,
Right.
10.
Well, they were. I read somewhere their ages.
Yeah, when this all went down. Yeah, they weren't very old. And well, and in fact, the new baby was born, I think, in 1978. So when his wife finally, or maybe 77, when she had finally, so 45. His youngest is probably my age, 45, your age. uh,
Wow.
anyway, so we'll keep an eye on this, obviously, and keep reporting as more rolls out here. I just thought it was really fascinating. I'm always fascinated by the people who have the guts to start a conversation with the serial killer, and remain in contact. And we've seen that many times over the years. Reporters, authors, sometimes family members. I honestly have so much respect for Jennifer Weiss that she has been able to keep her head and keep these conversations going with him, listening to him discuss how he removed her mother's head and the things he did to her and stuff. And she's been able to keep this conversation going because she knows that if she does, more families are going to get closure. And so she keeps going. She deserves a hell of a lot of respect for that, as well as Peter and, of course, the detective, who have all put in an unthinkable amount of hours in the presence of this man to be able to start solving more cases. And it's happening, you know, more confessions keep rolling out. And, my prediction is we'll see more before he passes, that he will keep rolling stuff out for his prized pals, and we'll be able to see more cold cases put to bed.
Yeah. Yeah, it looks like his youngest would probably have been born in roughly 77.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So,
I don't know. If I were them, I would have, and if I was their mama, honestly, I would have probably gone back to my maiden name and taken the kids with me on that, and gotten as much difference or distance from
yep. Moved to
this
the West
man and
Coast
his
and
name as possible. Yep, and just started fresh. Yep. Yep, what a deal. So, hopefully, we see more cases solved. But with that, we're going to switch gears and switch over to our last segment of the night. And our last segment tonight is Creepy Crime. Or Weird Crime Time, since that's what I played, and that works. Where am I? What's my name? Uh,
Yeah.
Once upon a time, as a young woman, when I got my driver's license, there was always this conversation about, of course, keep your doors locked, but also you should always look in the back seat. That used to scare the shit out of me to hear that. You should always check the back seat because there could be a bad guy back there and you wouldn't know it. Do you guys know how many times I've gotten in the car, headed down the road, and then had a panic in my heart because I forgot to check the damn back seat? Mm-hmm. But that's been a thing we've been told for a long time, right?
Yeah, sure.
Well,
I
a
tell my
few,
kids that.
a few days ago, a woman from Rhode Island got in her car, drove 30 miles to her workplace on Sunday night, and when she got to work, she discovered that there was a mostly naked man asleep in the back seat of her car, asleep on the floor of her Tahoe.
Wow.
She wasn't injured. He was still asleep, but how terrifying. So Jose Osario, he was partly clothed. He had a pair of shorts around one leg and a shirt wrapped around one arm. That's what he was
Okay.
wearing. Uh-huh.
Huh.
He was extremely intoxicated. And through an interpreter service, the police learned he had consumed a large amount of alcohol and marijuana earlier in the evening, and somehow in this wild and crazy state had managed to get in someone else's car and fall asleep and took a 30-mile ride and didn't even know it.
Hmm.
But here's the thing. This isn't the first time that he has been charged for getting into breaking into a vehicle. Yeah. So the charge
Oh.
was breaking and entering in a vehicle in the nighttime.
Ah.
So she'd been listening to a podcast, probably mine. That's all I'm thinking.
Yeah, definitely was.
Yep. Apparently, he climbed in the car when she started the engine. She started the car and ran back in the house to do something, and during that time, he climbed right in.
Ah. Wow.
Yeah.
From
So
her
there you
house?
go. Yeah.
Wow.
So
Well,
there you go.
we've heard stories like that over the
Mm-hmm.
years. The woman driving down the road, and every time, you know, she's driving down the road, and pretty soon somebody flashes their lights and honks their horn, and keeps doing that to her and has her scared until she goes all the way to the police station, only to find out that there's some creeper in the back of their car, and every time they get out of the back seat to, strangle her
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, somebody following them honks the horn and scares them, and they dive back down. And
Mm-hmm.
anyway,
Isn't that like a
yeah,
campfire ghost story we've heard
yeah,
before? Yeah.
that's the story we tell girls to keep them safe.
Yeah.
Why you always look in the back seat?
That's why I always look in the back seat. Now you know, boys and girls. So
I'm gonna
check
have
your
to
back
do the
seats.
research and find that story.
You really are now.
Yeah,
So, and keep your doors locked, please. Thank God she was safe and she just had an idiot on board, not a murderer.
right.
Yeah. Well, that's it. That's Monday. We will be back tomorrow with a brand new episode. We'll be back Wednesday with a brand new episode. We'll be back Wednesday night with Wednesday night case updates. So, lots more to come. Like, share, follow, do your thing.
Will I be back?
I don't know, will you?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know when
I just
Christy's ready
wondered
to
where I was gonna get
come
thrown
back.
out.
Well, you'll never get thrown out, but
Oh,
I'm not sure if we'll see Christy back this week or not. I'm not going to rush her, but as soon as she's not on pain meds and feeling crazy, I'm sure she's going to want to come back because she's bored already. So
So you're telling me this might be my one time. So
this might be
hello,
your one
everybody.
shot. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody. This may be my last time here.
We'll find out. You may be back. We'll see.
Maybe I'll be
All
too
right.
busy.
Oh, maybe you will. That's true. You're a busy guy.
Yeah.
You got to go umpire. Do the heavy lifting.
That's top secret.
Is it? Oh,
Yeah, you don't want people to find out about that.
that you're an umpire?
Yeah.
In general, yeah, it's not a. It's okay. You
Yeah.
do a good job.
Okay.
Alrighty, guys. Like, share, follow. Come over to Facebook and join our private discussion group. It's True Crime Squad discussion group, and it's a private group that you can join and come chat with us about all things true crime. And as always, thanks for being here. This has been yet another production of the True Crime Squad. Take care.
Bye-bye.